Welcome to the Andrea Giovino Show. Today we're going to discuss a topic of when I tried to go and marry a legal, legitimate businessman. So Britt's going to ask me some questions about that. Hi, Britt.
Hi. So I wanted to know, because you grew up in this like kind of criminal world and lifestyle. Your first husband was like a street guy. You got divorced. Then you dated a Captain Franklino for a couple of years. After that, you had your second husband, Carmine, legitimate businessman. Walk me through, like, how did you meet Carmine?
I met Carmine through my friend John Monty, which is a street guy also. We were we was skiing up in Hunter Mountain. And I was skiing up in Hunter Mountain after I broke up with Frank Lino, and John Monty was with all these guys, and Carmine was a legal businessman. And I liked him right off the bat. You know, I thought he was a great guy. He actually was a very wealthy businessman. And
What do you think like attracted you to him initially? Because he generally wouldn't have been your type, being like a legitimate person.
I think that he was very Italian, very handsome. He reminds me like of Sylvester Stallone type. He was like that, good-looking guy. And I think I was like, because of after the Frank Lino thing, I really just wanted to try to go with somebody like, you know, legal, because like when I was with Frank Lino, I was at that time frame, if you remember what I was saying, I was always worried, like back then there was a lot of shootings, a lot of killings, and I had a kid, and I didn't want to put myself into a situation where it was dangerous for me or my child. So I wanted to try to be with someone that was, you know, more stable, so to speak, stable.
Did you feel like when you had just met him and you were just dating him, like was like the courting different from how one of these like street guys would have pursued you?
Yeah, it was definitely different, where the street guys, the difference between a street guy and a regular legal guy, I think they value their money more because they work for it. The street guy blows the money, and they'll come out right from the beginning and shower you with the flowers, the gifts, the jewelry, the pocketbooks, you know, labels, big jewelry, where the legal businessman works hard for his money, and he's not going to just go give that away freely. And I certainly understood that. Carmine was generous, but he wasn't the type of man to just throw it away like, you know, those guys would. If one of those guys, for instance, example, they really are like you in the beginning, it's like love bombing. Mm-hmm. You know, they do the same thing with every woman. Oh, they'll, you know, think nothing of buying you a $10,000 bracelet or a Rolex or a diamond ring, but then they do that with every woman.
Right.
So the legal businessman, I think that they hold on to their money more. Not cheap. I'm not going to say he was cheap, because he wasn't cheap at all. And I would never be with somebody cheap. That's just not me, because I'm not a cheap person. So I don't like a man that's cheap. But they were different, very different. So.
And how did your relationship progress from meeting him to?
So my relationship progressed because he was more or less, he had money, so he would rent house. Well, we actually bought a house after about a year. He asked me to marry him, and then we got married. We bought a house up in Hunter Mountain, and we would frequent, before I got married, we would go out to the Hamptons, and he would get involved with like 3 or 4 other couples and rent a house on Dune Road in the Hamptons, which is right on the water. And so we'd go out there for the summer and then ski Hunter Mountain for the winter.
Did you feel like you fit in with like the other couples or like his friends and their wives?
No, I didn't. I didn't fit in. And he used to, well, what happened with that relationship, as I did not know, and I had no idea, just because someone is a legal businessman doesn't mean that they're a normal person. He was probably the most abusive, because he was...
In what way?
Well, he was a very heavy drinker, number one. And back then he did a lot of cocaine. I mean, I know a lot of people did cocaine, but he did a lot of cocaine, and he was a drinker. He was somewhat of an addict. And
did it take you time to see that?
Yeah, it took me a good 2 years, at least 2 years to see that. But at this point, I was already married and had a child with him. But
Do you think you were maybe like taken off guard by that more than you would have been with a street guy? Because I think like you can kind of expect a street guy to be like, you know, have maybe some addict tendencies. Like a lot of the men that you were around were doing like cocaine and things like that. Like, were you kind of taken aback by like, oh, this is a legitimate, totally legal person, but he's still like now kind of showing some of the same tendencies of like addiction and things?
yeah, I think that I didn't know so much about addiction. So it's like I knew he had a problem. He was drinking too much, but I didn't understand about addiction. I learned that later on because, you know, if you're not aware of it, who am I to call somebody an addict when I don't really know too much about what an
Yeah.
addict is? You
Yeah.
know, people think like I thought back then an addict is just, oh, you go and do heroin. I didn't understand alcoholism, so I really didn't know. I knew he was extremely abusive in a sense of what you asked me prior. Did I get along with his friends? He would deliberately try to degrade me, and I was his wife, degrade me in front of his friends with horrible things, like verbally degrade me.
Like, can you give me an example?
Like, we were at a party one night, and he would be like, you believe what I got to live with? I mean, we have money and everything, and she doesn't know how to call a maid because she wouldn't even know what to tell the maid. She's there in the bathroom scrubbing the bathrooms herself. Like, just degrading remarks, like always trying to, you know, just humiliate me on every level, like, and have conversations in front of people and know that I couldn't interact because I didn't understand the conversation because I didn't go to school, so I had no place there. So I would, it was more or less more abuse because I was enduring a lot more abuse and shutting down because I felt like
Like emotional abuse.
emotional abuse, but I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And then his drinking got so bad he wasn't coming home at night. He was staying out a lot, drinking in bars and
Do you think he was cheating?
oh yeah, he was probably cheating. Yeah, because along with that goes cheating. You
right.
know, he wasn't answering. Back then they didn't have cell phones; they had beepers, and I would beep him. He would never answer, and then I think that just at this point, I had had my son Toby, which was 6 years old, and from a prior marriage, and he was very good to Toby, and that's what really made me like, you know, fall in love with him, because I did think I loved him at one point until I really found out what he was about, and then I had a child with him, which was my son John, and he was extreme control freak. For instance, another example, I was under so much stress with that relationship. I think I was like 105 pounds. I was so thin. He would critique everything I did, like frying veal cutlets. You didn't fry them right. It's supposed to be 4 minutes on this side and 4 minutes on that side. And then he'd come home and he'd take his finger and he'd go above the door and see if there was dust there and what did I do all day? Like, who even thinks of that?
Yeah,
You know, it was
yeah.
really like insane. Like I was walking around literally like
Yeah.
shaking. Yeah. And I had a lot of money. I mean, he had a lot of money, but again, I wasn't fulfilled. I was just so shut down. And I think
What do you think your family thought of him? Like, did they approve of your relationship?
no, and
with him?
he didn't like them either because he would go in my mother's house because he was a legal man and he would see in my mother's house she had all these stolen car radios and everything and she was a part of letting my brothers do whatever they wanted to do. So he would say, I don't want you and the kid to go there. I don't want my son in that house. So he was looked down upon that. He looked down upon that.
How did that make you feel?
Well, I mean, it made me feel kind of torn because that's my family, you know, and I'm not going to not go to my mother's house. So it caused a lot of problems within the marriage. And I think that what finally ended the marriage was he came home, and my son still remembers this. My son Toby talked to me about it recently. he came home and he was drunk and on cocaine, and he started fighting with me. He woke me up out of my sleep, dragged me out of bed, literally dragged me out of bed. And we had this apartment in Queens, Middle Village. He dragged me down because it was like a 3 steps up with the bedrooms, dragged me down the steps. He was a big guy. He was like 6'1", dragged me down the steps and started choking me on the couch. And my son, Toby, woke up. He was 7 years old at the time, jumped on his back and was biting him, literally biting into him to get off of me because he was choking me. And for no reason at all. That's when I threw him out of the house.
Was that the first time he put his hands on you?
He was abusive. Like I had a girlfriend over one time, and it was so humiliating. He'd come home and for no reason open the refrigerator and pour the juice on the floor and go, now clean it up. Orange juice, just stuff super abusive,
Yeah.
Because my girlfriend came over and he didn't want my friend to be over.
Yeah.
Like just stuff like that, like babyish, like so babyish, or knock things off the counter, like that type of abuse, but not abusive, like hitting me. That was the first time, and I was screaming and fighting, and then my son got up.
The first time he physically abused you and put his hands on you, he dragged you out of bed, down the stairs, and started choking you.
And that was the night that my son helped me. Yeah, my son started, and Toby, he was good to him. He liked him, but Toby was, biting and fighting to get off my mother, and he just...
Did it stop him?
Yeah, it stopped him. He got out of the house, and then after that, he got a place, and we filed for divorce, and that was it. And that was the end of my legal business, man. But, I mean, I came out of that marriage with a nice financial, package.
I mean, yeah, but you can't stay in a situation
No,
like that.
I couldn't stay with this. Not for my child alone to endure that, where he's got to go help his mother. So, I've not, people go, oh, you had bad luck with men. I did not have bad luck with men. I chose the wrong men. Mm-hmm. I chose the wrong men. I chose men, again, for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, but I mean, you're going from a life of being raised to idolize criminals and street guys and that, and then you finally meet and are kind of it's fall in love with this person who you think is a more normal option and a more normal life path, and then it turns out to be almost even more abusive than your past relationships
100%.
with people who were criminals.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that in the beginning, and it's very true, is that you really don't know somebody until you're with them like a good 6 months of being with them on a regular basis. Because in the beginning of a relationship, everybody's on their best behavior. They're both trying to impress you. Everything is exciting. The first touch on the knee is exciting. The first kiss is exciting. The first sexual experience is exciting. So everything is exciting. It's the love bombing phase, the gifts, the restaurants.
Yeah, you're on your best behavior.
You're on your best behavior. But after that, the real person comes out.
Yeah.
And when the real person comes out and the person is comfortable with you, then you see who that person really is. And he was an ugly, ugly person.
At any point before any physical abuse started, where it was more just emotional and verbal abusiveness in the relationship, did you ever consider leaving?
No. I didn't.
Why do you think?
I think because I just wanted to be married. I wanted to work on my marriage. I don't like going out dating, I think there's this thing, here, I don't know if it's just this country or whatever. Men could go screw whoever they want. They can go out and have as many women as they want. But if a woman has failed marriages, she's some kind of pig, or she's, labeled, what the names are for her.
Right.
And I think that my therapist had said to me one time, because I was like, I had 3 failed marriages. And she's like, I don't care if you've had 10 failed marriages. You don't stay with someone to please other people.
Yeah.
I don't care if it takes you 10 to get to the right person, or never a person, but you don't blame yourself. Good that you don't stay with people that you made poor choices with.
Yeah.
And that's why I would never.
Do you think that the relationship needed to get so toxic to physical, though, that to push you to leave?
Yes.
You do.
Yes, I do think that, honestly speaking, I really do, because I think that I just kept like ignoring it because I just wanted to be married. I didn't want to be, I come from a family, my parents never divorced. My parents believed in marriage, I believe in marriage, but it has to be with the right person. There's a lot that goes to marriage. This wasn't a guy that's going to go to therapy. He just wasn't. And he had, all the characteristics, not just an alcoholic or doing cocaine. He was abusive.
Yeah.
He was abusive.
Do you think, like, what would you, if you could tell yourself something now, and you could go back and tell yourself something as that younger woman in that relationship, like, what would you tell her? Would you tell her to leave sooner? Would you tell her to leave at the first sign
the first
like,
sign
what would
of
you
it,
say?
I would say the first sign you see any type of abuse, it's going to get worse. It will get worse. It doesn't get better. It gets worse. Yes, I stayed too long, but for some reason, which that's why I'm not in a relationship now, and I've been single for 10 years and I don't date, I just feel like it's very, like, it's just very hard for me that when you're in it, you get sucked in. And I think that I have major codependent issues too. When I ever did feel like I fell in love or had a committed relationship, I stayed too long. And I shouldn't. I look back now and I've stayed too long in relationships that were extremely abusive. So the minute you see any type of abuse, it gets worse. It does not get better. The verbal abuse, then the physical abuse, and then it just continues.
After he would have like these episodes of like trying to shame you or degrade you, like would there almost be like a makeup period? Like would he try to compensate for it, or would he just like try to pretend it never happened? Like how was he after this? Did you kind of just go about, like, did you both just kind of like the next day act like nothing happened? Like you didn't just shame me in front of my friend and spill juice all over the floor?
No,
or
I didn't want
there...
to bring it up. I didn't want to bring it up because that would make another fight. Like, this was a person that was in Vietnam back then. He had Vietnam syndrome, they said, and he would go into these fits and all of that. And they say a lot of people that went to Vietnam had this, like, PTSD. And I just think that because his family, I was very close to his sister, and I was close to her even after divorce. And she said that when he came back from Vietnam, he was never the same. He was just never the same anymore. He was like that with them, and he was extremely cold with them, and he'd go into these depressions.
Yeah.
And so, no, I just didn't want to bring it up to escalate anything. No.
Yeah. What would your, other than like it doesn't get better, what would your advice be to somebody who's living in an abusive situation? Like, I mean, it has to be now you have 2 kids, you're married, you have 2 children, and like, you're in a toxic relationship, but it has to be scary to think about leaving. Like, what would you tell me if I was in that position?
Well, I wouldn't, a toxic relationship where if a woman is going to get hurt like violently and all, you don't want to trigger that personality. You definitely don't want to trigger them when they're in one of those frenzies, because no matter how tough you are or whatever, like as far as fight, we're still women, and the man is going to overpower her by hurting her. So definitely, I always knew that he's going to hurt me. So I was always smart enough to get out of a situation that I knew I was in with all these toxic men that I put myself around. Many stories of toxic men. And I think that to have a plan B, to have a plan B in that what your plan is going to be as far as maybe whatever, go to church, go to therapy, and build your self-esteem up, and have a plan where when you do leave, you'll have some financial, help for your kids and for you, but to try to get out of it, because it's not going to get any better. It gets worse as time goes on.
What about isolating? Because I know you made a comment that he didn't want you necessarily around your mom because like they did illegal things. But do you think that also maybe was because he was just trying to like isolate you for control? Because I know like a lot of people in abusive relationships will say that like their abuser tries to isolate them from their friends, from their family, from any type of like support system or support outside of just like them, their abuser being the only one that like they have. Do you think that played a part in him like not wanting you to have a relationship with your family? Like was it just your mom or was it your siblings
Oh
too
no,
that
it was
he
my
was
whole
like
family. He didn't want me to be bothered them. He didn't like when I started seeing a therapist because I started seeing a therapist at that time frame. I was 25, and I started seeing a therapist. But they say, you know, to get healthy in therapy, you have to remember all the years you were sick and the behaviors that you've endured as a child up until the time. So I had a lot of years of therapy to grow, and I still was making one mistake after another because it's very hard to change. I say that openly all the time. It's very hard to change. I've never been a victim. I feel like not a victim. I'm someone that made poor choices in my life. I own that. I accept that. And I think that, you know, the best suggestion I would give to women is that, you know, try to have a plan B to get out of it and work on yourself and build your self-esteem up, because when you're taking that, you don't have a good self-esteem, because a woman that has a good self-esteem wouldn't even tolerate it the first time. So I didn't have a good sense of myself. If I had a good sense of myself, I would have never put up with it.
Yeah.
I would have walked away right day one. You walk out, you walk away. Don't talk to me like that. We're done. But
Yeah.
I didn't. I stood and took it. So that just shows I didn't feel good about myself.
Do you have any regrets about that relationship? Like, do you regret the relationship? Do you like almost like, are you like, that was a learning experience for me? I did gain a beautiful son out of it.
I have
or
a
do you like
beautiful
regret it
son.
altogether? Like, I should
No.
have never even tried to go down this path.
No, I don't. Because I don't regret the relationship, because there was some things about him that obviously I was attracted to, you know, and that I thought I loved him. And I have a beautiful, you know, I have a son, an adult son now, and that was, you know, a beautiful thing that I've gotten from the relationship. I just think that even today, he doesn't have a relationship with his son. He didn't have a relationship with his sister. I think that he's just not a well man.
Yeah.
I think he still didn't get help. I mean, he stays isolated by himself. So I know it was him, you know.
Yeah.
So I just think it was a learning process. It was a learning process. But all of my relationships that I've had, I look back and say, I've learned from it. I've learned. It took me a long time, you know, but growing takes long, but I've learned. So that's basically.
Yeah. I think we can wrap on
Yep.
that note. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you to all my guests that have subscribed. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It means so much to me. Please do press the subscribe button and tune in next time. There's always a good story. Thank you.